Hello everyone. Today I have with me Sanjay Kumar, who is a veteran business and technology expert with over 30 years of experience in the industry. He has a wide range of domain experience like retail banking, insurance, wealth management, and trading, to name a few. He's also the president of the current IIBA Bangalore chapter and very well known for his ever smiling and helping nature within the BA community. Welcome, Sanjay sir, on this first ever BRC, as we call it as BA Rapid Chat session.
Thank you, Vikas. Happy to be joining you on this initiative.
Thank you, sir. So I have some questions that I want to really do. It's a rapid chat, so I would expect a rapid responses from you on the questions. So the first one suggestion you had got in your earlier days in the industry, especially as a business analyst.
The biggest thing I think which I got was keep on learning, keep on expanding my horizons. There is no limit. If my project doesn't allow it, figure out new ways, but always keep learning.
Thank you, sir. That's a very wonderful suggestion. I'm sure we all would love to continue that. Now, the second one, out of all the domains you have worked in your career, which one is closer to your heart and why?
The domain which I enjoy the most is capital markets, and for two reasons. One, I learned it on my own, making losses while trading on my own account. Second, now it comes in very handy because I know a little bit better about the markets and it helps me on my investment side.
Excellent. Now, the third one, with all the experience you have gained, and if I have to ask you to provide one suggestion or one tip to the new and the aspiring BS in the community, what would that be?
The biggest item which I would say is understand we are on the joint of business and technology. It's not enough for us only to understand the business side, but also understand technology, not from coding perspective, but from what technology can provide us, because that is what we need to take to our business users.
So that brings in a very good concept here. So what are your thoughts on the importance of domain knowledge for a business analyst in performing their activities effectively?
If we don't understand the business domain, whatever we do will be like passing a paper around, taking from one side, which is business users, whatever they relay, and move it on to the technology team, and vice versa, in case the questions arise from the business, from the technology. What is important is if we understand the business domain, we can prompt our business users for a little bit extra depth. And that depth is what makes our work interesting, at the same time enriches whatever output we give and explain to the technology team. So domain is a clear advantage in our lives.
I have heard about this concept and I would really want to ask this last question. Now, how can people know more about this intuitive concept that I've heard from you as well in the past called knowledge driven design?
I'll take a step back. It takes us longer to understand how and the best way a business analyst can work. Now, that is a longer perspective. A shorter area is we can move across domains and pick up a domain very easily. KDD is one of the frameworks which can help us pick up a new domain fairly quickly. Second item, while we work on KDD, also keep in mind always whatever is our personal experience in some of the domains, whether it's travel, whether it's banking, capital markets, retail, any of the domains, our own reference points, which is our own experience in these domains as a consumer, also helps. So these two combinations can make it very quick for us to scale up on newer domains.
Thank you very much. I'm sure everybody's excited to know about the knowledge-driven design, the framework. It's very new and there's a session that is planned up and we'll all look forward to that. Thank you.
India webinar on the topic Leveraging Requirements for Knowledge-Driven Development, otherwise called KDD. I'm Kanchana, working as Digital Consultant in Wells Fargo Solutions Center, and I'll be hosting today's session. What is a KDD? KDD is not a process. It's a way of doing design or product development that enables teams making decisions based on knowledge. KDD provides a technique to learn domain knowledge. It helps bridging techniques with domain knowledge. In today's webinar, we will discuss each of the propositions of KDD from the perspective of the business analyst with a view to attract business analysts to consider maturing KDD to extend it widely used to help them in mastering BA techniques and domain knowledge. Let me give a short introduction to our speakers of today's session. Today, we are going to be enlightened by our speakers, Mr. Manoj Kumar and Mr. Sanjay Kumar, who is going to show the various propositions of KDD for the business analyst community. Mr. Manoj Kumar Lal graduated in mechanical engineering from BIT Sindri and did his ME in aerospace IISc Bangalore in 1997. He joined TCS immediately after IISc and has been there for more than 24 years now. He is a member of International Association of Knowledge Management IAKM and presented in many conferences across worldwide and spoke about KDD. He has also written a book titled Knowledge-Driven Development, Bridging Waterfall and Agile Methodologies, published jointly by IISc and Cambridge University Press in June 2018. His second book, Introduction to Business Domains for Software Engineers, got published last week and has been receiving wide appreciation. Our next speaker for today is Mr. Sanjay Kumar. Sanjay completed MBA Finance from Wharton Business School, Pennsylvania in 1993 and an engineering degree holder from BITS Pilani in 1986. Sanjay has an illustrious career spanning over 30 years in information technology and operations arena. His vast experience has covered various domains like retail banking, insurance, wealth management, and trading systems. I request the participants to join with me in welcoming our esteemed speakers, Mr. Manoj Kumar Lal and Mr. Sanjay Kumar. Welcome, Mr. Manoj Kumar Lal and Mr. Sanjay Kumar. Before we start the session, I kindly request the participants to post any questions in the Q&A box. We will take it up with the speakers once the session gets over. I request the participants to also participate in the end survey poll, which will enable us to improve our future sessions. Over to the speakers now. The stage is all yours, sir.
Thank you, Kanchana. Good evening, everyone. I know it's a little bit of a challenge, which I'm posing for everyone by making sure that you guys attend a webinar on Saturday evening. But that's the time where all of us can actually be free from our work routines. So without much further ado, let's start the session. Critical part. What is KDD? KDD started off as a knowledge-driven development perspective. However, it has now been extended to start looking at business domains also. And today's session, we will focus pretty much entirely onto looking at KDD from a business analysis perspective, areas which we will cover and add on further is more around, sorry, just give me a moment, is more around how do we look at business domain knowledge, how do we look at requirements, impact analysis, start looking at utilizing this also for test perspectives and keeping our knowledge repository up to date. Now that's one of the things which, as I look at, will be something which we struggle with on a regular basis. How do we keep our knowledge repositories in place? Typically, when we start looking at our knowledge perspectives, we start looking at various documentation, manual, diagrams, charts spread all over the place. They could be online, they could be anywhere at all. And it is not in a consistent environment. It is not something which is in a single place. We have to manually connect a lot of the places. The second thing is, as we start looking, even the documents which we create, over time they have evolved, they have changed. we started looking at, initially started looking at from a requirements document, functional specific documents, functional specifications document. We started moving towards use cases. Now it has moved on to user stories. We are also expected to start looking at from a data perspective, which is a ER diagram, process maps. How do we combine all these? How do we start looking at all these diverse pieces of information, which is critical for us? Now, the challenge is with all these varieties, this is where we start making business analysis a culture, an art, and not necessarily a science. Today's session, we will devote to how can we convert it to a science which can be replicated, which can be duplicated, which will give us consistent results. I'm going to introduce a few concepts in the initial part. The first section is around a problem space understanding. When we started looking at initial problem solving perspective, we were looking at small softwares, standalone softwares, focused more on to programming languages. And I'm talking from my own experience where I started off as a programmer. We were solving problems. There was very little beyond small programs which we were working on. And I'm talking close to 40 years back. So it's been quite some time. As the softwares became more complex, it became software systems, we started focusing on to software engineering. We started to look at different stages which were evolved in terms of developing a consistent software system. It required requirements analysis, design document, focus on to the actual low-level design. Before we would get on to coding, testing would be a separate item before we would go down to implementation. Now, this is where the requirements management focused on to how do we understand the problems of our business users. We were still far away from providing a solution. We were understanding the problems and we were converting those to technology-driven solutions. Trouble started when different systems came up within the organization. These systems had to talk to each other. We started looking at from an enterprise view of these systems. These were no longer software systems, these were business systems. And I saw that change sometime in mid-90s, where we started looking at systems in a banking environment, which were focused onto retail banking system, deposit systems, card systems, back-end GL, all these systems had to be combined together. But now the difference was the understanding common across all these systems? Was the knowledge base based onto a common theme? Different systems, different looks, different ways to operate, different interpretations, even of keywords. And that is where the challenge came in. Every user of the system, which was a GL system, let's say, understood the context on the general ledger side of activities much more so than the front-end person who was looking at customer service perspective. Now, if you had to start looking at multi-entry GLs, the front-end guy would not understand it. So this is where we slowly migrated from being problem solvers to start looking at understanding what was the business of our users, what was the enterprise looking at. Now, the moment we started talking about the enterprise, we started looking at what was the business domain. The business domain at the highest levels was still same. Retail banking was retail banking. Fixed deposit had 2 or 3 rules, and that is what we used to do. Credit cards were just in the nascent stage, and I'm talking mid-90s to late 90s. Credit cards were just in the nascent stage, and they were basic credit cards. You would charge on them, you would pay them back on a monthly basis, On a rare occasion, we would revolve the balances. Regulations started coming around. Changes started coming around. Organization, departments started specializing even more. A card operations person could not work in the retail banking operation side of activities. The business perspectives were so very different. And these are how the domain knowledge also started evolving. But the challenge again was one very simple one. Pieces of these domain knowledge were across so many different people. Whatever be the system, and I'm going back to the previous perspective, the enterprise business system, whatever be the system, these pieces of knowledge were again contextual and they had to be combined together. They had to be looked at in a consistent set, and that consistency was what was driving failure rates in most of these systems. The challenges were coming at the integration levels. The challenges were coming at the integration level because of the different understanding across different departments of, let's say, the same word. And there we started getting into bigger and bigger challenges. These led to some classic failures across systems which were not made ever public. Third perspective, how do we start looking at some of our current environments? I'm talking about inventory points. When I start talking about inventory points, typically what are the kind of inventory? So I'm making a leap from the concept of problem space understanding to now focus on to the current project and domain perspectives. We start looking at some level of structure. We have requirements. Each of the requirements might be spawning off multiple rules. These rules could be interdependent also. How these rules get used start becoming important. Then there are test cases which come in. Each of these are inventory points from a system perspective. Each of these are related to each other. Each of these have to have a significant relationship. Otherwise, the challenge comes in is it required? Let's say a test case is not linked to any requirement. Is the test case even required for us to include into our test environments? If it is not, again, the question will come, why are we running that test case? Because that becomes something which is a not required item, going to take time, and might fail, leading to, again, different questions coming up. As we start looking from that perspective, we started looking at from what was the kind of knowledge scoping we were looking at. Domain knowledge, we started looking at business rules. We started looking at product. Now the product could be the simplest of the items, which was a savings account. Product could be the simplest of the items, which we would talk about in different areas, which is a checkout system and a retail store. It could be a simple item, such as a product selection on an e-commerce site. The process and the process perspective at the highest level were common, but different organizations modified the processes slightly to suit their businesses, to start bringing out their perspectives far more strongly, giving them a business edge over possibly their competitors, which was what the business rules started driving at. If we take the domain knowledge to the next stage, this is where the enterprise perspective started coming in. How the system was being used. What was the IT application? This was specific to enterprise. This was no longer at the highest level common across the industry, but specific to the enterprise perspective. And we would typically work into a small project or a large project. So we would get into the requirements, we would get into the test cases. These are just some of the inventory items which we would start using. But again, the hierarchy which was there at the highest level, domain knowledge, going on to an organization specific, which was enterprise knowledge, and then on to the project knowledge, which was project specific for whatever we were doing tactically at that time. Just to give you a kind of a flavor, if I look at a savings account, and I'm taking an example from the banking, I will move on to some of the other areas also very soon, just to give you a perspective of how the domains start looking at it. Savings account, at least in India. Now, please be careful. It's not true outside India. A lot of countries don't have that. They are interest-bearing accounts. Now, these are domain specific across the savings account across India. Check facility is mostly available on a savings account. Now, different banks can have different interest rates. Today, these interest rates typically vary from 2.5% to something like 4 to 5% is a maximum, which is on the savings account. How many check leaks will be there? And this is where the organization perspective starts coming into play. Item 1 on the organization perspective is what is the interest they're going to pay on a savings account. Second item is going to be how many check leaves will they issue in a year beyond which it will get charged. Now, starting next week, State Bank of India on the very basic savings accounts is going to allow only 10 checks a year. Beyond that, the charges start off. And the charges are not 3 rupees or something, they're fairly stiff onto the basic. Now the project might require changing, let's say, the interest rate from 4% to 3.5%. Actually, these days it's going to as low as 2.5%. And checks are always chargeable. There is no waiver on that number of checks for much later. Now, this is a specific project which had to be done. Now, this is where the differences, I'm just trying to bring out the perspectives around the domain knowledge, enterprise, and project knowledge. If I move on to password, the minimum requirement, password should be strong enough. It cannot be easily deciphered. This is an industry perspective. Now, industry perspective across, not just in banking. Some organization might say 8 characters long, consisting a combination of alphanumeric. Others might say we want special characters. Others might say we want alphabet also, which is at least upper and lowercase mix. Now, the project we might be doing is I have to trigger an email to the registered email ID of the user immediately after a password is changed. Now, this is very specific to the way the usage characteristic which is being defined at that particular organization. The password requirements would be defined across the organization. However, the password change and the notification on the password change might vary from system to system within that same organization also. They might have different rules on their internal systems and different rules, let's say, onto the consumer system, different rules onto the seller systems, if I go to an e-commerce perspective. So just to encapsulate what I have been talking, an enterprise would have a product. This is an offering from the enterprise. It will interact with multiple stakeholders, have a complete life cycle, which is also allowed to be some local variations. So there might be some changes in the process. Now, the process might be working differently through the communication to the different stakeholders, geography, which is logically grouped. How would we go about implementing that? By implementing business rules. Business rules which define for this particular geography, we are going to do it this way. For this set of stakeholders, we are going to address the process slightly differently. All these automated through an IT app. And that is where the entire business data also resides. It's a very simplistic view right now of any enterprise system, but this is where the highest level view resides. Let's get on to what is the critical part of our discussion today. what is a domain knowledge framework within KDD, knowledge driven development. And we are going to focus using this crisscross through the rest of the slides. On one side, I might have products, and I will give you an example very quickly onto that. So each of the product might have certain processes attached to it. Typically, what happens is multiple products have the same kind of process which is going through them, whether it is account opening, whether it's registering a user, whether it is checking out different products, but the process level is fairly similar across a lot of them at the high level. Interesting part, how do these products differentiate from other products? It is at the intersection of that process. Product one might have a different set of business rules, which might be defining the process step. Product two might have a totally different set of business rules. So how I might open an account in a savings account would be very different than how I might open a fixed deposit account. Or even if I go very far off, how I might open an account on an e-commerce site. My business rules could be very different. So at every intersection point, there will be a certain set of business rules which we will start looking at, focused on to giving the unique nature to that particular product and the process associated with it. Now, these are what are the statements of reference. What you see on the right side, SOR, that statement of reference, which is a kind of a superset across the business rules, because it will comprise business rules at the bare minimum. There might be some of the other perspectives also defining statements which could be combined there under the statement of reference. For our set today, we will focus only onto the business rule perspective. How do we start looking at it? I wanted to get an example, and I have to thank Anupam for helping me put these together. These are loyalty programs. These are frequent flyer programs when I start looking at travel. These are programs which are where reward programs are there. So typically on a credit card side, we talk about rewards. On e-commerce side, we talk about loyalty points. On travel side, we talk about frequent flyer programs. 3 different products from 3 different industries on the loyalty side. However, each of these products is driven by 3 or 4 common set of processes. How do you earn those loyalty points? Now, when you want to earn those loyalty points, there is a certain mechanism. How do you redeem, or in industry terminology, burn those loyalty points? And lastly, customer acquisition. I can add a 4th and 5th set of operations, which will be customer service and so on and so forth. However, these are some of the 3 critical processes related to loyalty. In the earn side, and this is where the beauty of the loyalty program lies. Just to give you a kind of a perspective onto the loyalty side. We want to give the customers a benefit whenever they spend money with us. That's their loyalty, and we are rewarding them for that loyalty. We might accrue certain points, certain rewards. We might give them some small rewards in return. That's the earn side. Now that we have given the customer a little bit of a high on being loyal to us, somewhere we need to figure out what is the obligation we have incurred by giving those frequent flyer points or reward points. What are those obligations? Now, with some of the changes in the last decade on the accounting side, each of the organizations has now been forced to start putting some provisions against these accrued loyalty points. So what the organizations want to do, now that they have made you happy by giving you certain loyalty points, they want to retire these loyalty points at the cheapest possible cost to them. That's the burn side, that's the redemption side. So they might ask you to use your loyalty points for the simplest of the things, which if you might push, they might give you free. On the travel side, it might be a business class upgrade, especially if you're a esteemed member of the traveler club, and even if you don't use loyalty points, but they'll ask you to retire some loyalty points on that. It doesn't cost the airline much to upgrade you to business class, provided the seat is there from economy. If you have been a good customer, they would like that. If you're coming and spending more and more onto the e-commerce site, they're earning their commissions from the sellers. They want you to come back. So they might want to give you certain rewards, certain comfort. For spending around 5,000 rupees, they might give you a 10 rupee cashback. Small cost to pay, because the commission which they are earning on that 5,000 is far greater. Customer acquisition automatically becomes critical onto the loyalty program, because the larger the number of the customers who are acquired onto the loyalty program, the easier it is for the organization also which is running the loyalty program to manage the things. It's the economies of scale. It is also the value of the business, because this is where the individual loyalty customers and the loyalty organizations actually charge the end organization some small amount for managing the loyalty programs. We will go a little bit more deeper into the loyalty side, but before that, I just want to take one more item, which is let's look at a banking product. Now, keep in mind, I'm keeping this at a fairly high level to establish the concept. I can do a deep dive into each of these and go to the granular level of processes. However, for the initial session, it might become a challenge to explain the concept and also do a deep dive into the detailed process. So we can keep it for a little later. However, that is something which it is capable of. If we look at investment banking, corporate banking, retail banking, these are the three common arms across the banking side. Each of them undergoes account opening, undergoes transaction management, undergoes account closure at certain times. Now, the account opening process at the retail banking is going to be very different than the account opening process at a corporate banking. On a retail banking, it might be how many, is it a single account or a joint account? Multiple other small things, then who's going to be the signatory, whether it's one of the signatories or both signatories. Corporate banking typically requires far more complex rules across signatories. The documentation requirement is also very different. Investment banking, totally different ballgame. Whenever an organization wants to utilize the services on investment banking, they have to do far greater disclosures in terms of the entire kind of services which they want under investment banking. Let's come back to the loyalty side. I'm also using the opportunity to start expanding the perspective onto a different domain, which a lot of you might have been exposed to. So I'm talking around the earn point onto the loyalty side. And when I start looking at the earn point, let's say on an e-commerce site, I am looking at various areas. What is the quantity of purchase which is being done? What is the time of purchase? Was there a specific, let's say, a specific promotion which was being run? Mode of payment. What is the category of purchase? Not just the quantum of purchase. So let's say on an e-commerce side, Amazon or Flipkart, there is a promo which is being run on purchase of electronics, which is a subset or subcategory, provided you're purchasing more than 2,000 rupees of products for the duration, which is 1st to 15th of July, and you're making the payment using either UPI or a co-branded card. Now, here you see how the business rules are coming in. The earn point onto the loyalty is what is the quantum purchased? Was there a promotional event which was going on? Category of purchases. Category of purchases very clearly marked on this case is electronics. Quantum purchase, it has to be more than 2000. What was the promotional? It has to be done between 1st to 15th of July. Mode of payment, it has to be either UPI or a co-branded card, nothing else. So my product here is e-commerce. My process is the earn process. That is why we are just focused onto the one node, giving you a perspective on how the rules get defined. Give you a counter example, not on the earn, but on the burn side. Let's move products. This time, let's go to travel. I might want to utilize my frequent flyer programs for multiple items. I could use it for flight bookings. I could use it for a simple item like access to the business lounge. I could use it for in-flight product purchase. I could do some redemptions onto the frequent flyer side for small amounts. I could redeem it on a partner site, which is hospitality, where I could stay at a hotel and get some discount. Now, these are some of the scenarios which might be there onto the redemption of the frequent flyer programs. So, what is it that I'm purchasing? Again, there will be a business rule defined based on that. If it's a ticket, there might be certain set of items which will kick in. Are there enough reward tickets which are available for this particular flight? Again, what is the mode of purchase? There might be different mode of purchases where the amount of frequent flyer points which will be redeemed might vary. If it's online, it might require lesser number of points. If it's on call or last minute at the counter, the number of frequent flyer points which might have to be redeemed would be higher, possibly. Is it a redemption which is for the entire purchase, or is it a redemption which might be something which is based on a percentage of the amount to be paid? What is my loyalty level also? Am I a silver member? Am I a gold member? Now, these are some of the things which will start defining. These are where the business rules are coming in. There might be redemption caps. I cannot redeem if I don't have minimum 2000 loyalty points available with me. I might be allowed to redeem only up to 4000 loyalty points. You've seen some of that in Make My Trip, yatra.com, and some of these portals. This is where the burn side and the easy part of the burn side, how they want to retire the loyalty points, starts coming into play. This is just one set of business rules around the redemption side onto the travel side. As we dig deeper into the processes, we go to granular processes, these business rules will also become far more granular. This is how we depict some of the perspectives. Now, the moment I start looking at the product versus process perspective and the business rules at any of the intersection points, what is the intersection point of a product versus a process? That is that particular process for that product. Account opening for a savings account. Customer acquisition onto a travel loyalty program. You see those handouts being done, or at least used to be done when the flights were common. These days, the number of flights has also gone down, that they would come around before the end of the flight. Are you a member? If not, would you like to become a member? Customer acquisition, that's one of the routes. But there might be other routes which are there. So this is how we can depict the business domain knowledge. The moment I start bringing in my business rules, I am bringing in some level of project specific knowledge, or specifically that system specific knowledge onto the environment. And depicting them at these levels becomes easier. I'm going to skip one slide. I'll come back to that slide a little later. As I now move from the requirement side to the testing side, what have I done? I have taken a simple process, which is again a purchase at an e-commerce site, and I have started putting some of the rule perspectives. What are the promotional codes which are being used? What is the payment mode which is being used? According to that, there might be certain earn of reward points. If I'm paying by loyalty, there is actually the earn versus burn which is going on at the same time. Now, this is a process flow. If I start focusing onto the business rules here, I've just expanded that early perspective of the earn. If I start focusing onto the business rules, it starts giving me my test scenarios. What my test scenario might be: I have purchased 5,000 rupees of product category XYZ. I have got a promo code, or alternately, I have got no promo code, and I'm going to apply that. Based on that, my final price will be shown. Now, based on my mode of payment, so there's a special which is running. If I use the credit card of Bank A, I am eligible for another 5% cashback. So here the card is there. If I make a UPI payment, I will get an immediate cashback of a few rupees, capped at, let's say, 50 rupees. Again, this is a business rule driven payment perspective. And based on how I'm conducting myself, the quantum of the purchase, the promo codes which I'm using, the payment modes which I'm using, I might have some cashback coming, I might have some points which are being earned, or I might be eligible for some promotional vouchers. Now we see that on e-commerce sites on a regular basis. But what have I done? I've started creating a scenario which I can use to test out the system. Now this is only one of the scenarios. Now let me go back to that. When I start looking at from a test cases, I am looking at effectiveness of my testing. Now there's been a challenge around the testing environment where more and more the business analysts are getting involved. Why? Because they understand the business domain. They understand the requirements which have been generated. They have been the ones who have been in touch with the end user for putting together the requirements. So for the time being, we might want to use them as surrogate business users. That's one of the roles of business users. And this is where we start coming into play with what is the kind of testing? Do we guide some of the people onto the component testing? Do we also run some of the system test perspectives or the business user dummy user acceptance test perspectives? Some non-functional tests also might be there, but much more importantly, we will stick to typically the UAT or the component testing in small sequences. This is a totally different concept, but it is based again onto the entire perspective which we had in terms of how we are depicting our perspectives either as a mesh or as a process. This is called orthogonal array test strategy. It's already an established test approach which looks at optimizing my test duration, my test cases. And this can be derived fairly quickly from our set of business rules and processes which are wrapped around these business rules. Now, one way to look at the business rules, when if I can give an analogy, we were doing a lot of process maps. Every time we came across a decision box in my process map, chances are 90% plus, 95% plus, that determination on that decision box is done through a business rule perspective. So that gives you a point perspective also. How do you start identifying the business rules? Last slide. As I start looking at some of these areas, I need to look at what is my impact analysis. Now, as the systems get more complex, I need to start looking at my impacts making small changes, which areas will get impacted. The moment I start using my framework on KDD, I have an ability to narrow down where my change is coming. Is it a business rule change which is coming? Is it a process which is changing? Is there a different feature of the product, which in case is typically driven by business rules, very few times driven by process changes? I need to know. So this picturization, this visualization using this matrix starts coming in handy, that how many of my areas are not changing at all? How many new requirements are coming? So if I'm talking about the highest level of the process, as I drill down, I would have these meshes at subordinate levels also. At each of those levels, I can actually start looking at how many of my inventory pieces are changing. Remember, what was the inventory? My inventory started off with what are the requirements? What are the business rules? What are the relationships? What are the test cases? So how many of my inventories, new inventory pieces are coming in? How many have changed? And what is the dependencies which are changing? So this is one way to look at deriving from this particular depiction. Reverse also holds. Once I have done the impact analysis, once the project is ready to go live, I am ready to update my enterprise knowledge. I'm ready to update that into an environment. Yes, these are the specific items which have changed. There is no change onto so many different inventory pieces. The change is in this inventory piece, and I am able to update that into a single repository in a consistent manner. Using KDD frameworks, this is something which we can do. As a result, as time progresses, as projects keep happening time and again, my number of inventories, my number of relationships will change. As it changes, my reuse of the old artifacts becomes better and better. It results in a level of time saving. It results in a level of accuracy because I'm reusing some of the old components, not having to redefine it. Nobody is sitting around and redefining or redesigning a wheel. They're only focused on to the granular changes which are happening. As projects progress, my reuse also improves. Yes, systems become more complex, but if I can maintain a level of reuse, the complexity level of the systems stays manageable. I have seen a different perspective, which is over a duration of 5 to 7 years, typically, the systems, and I'm talking about the enterprise system collection across our organization, typically end up deteriorating by 15 to 20%, which results in about 30% of the budget going into maintenance, which could have been avoided. That's the time when you start taking a decision. Let me take this system and create a complete new replacement system using newer technologies and get away from my recurring maintenance cost, because that recurring maintenance cost over 2 years or 3 years is enough to typically fund a new system using newer technologies. This is the value when we talk about in money terms, the value of exponential growth. In system terms, the complexity and the maintainability keeps on increasing exponentially. This system can actually, KDD environment and the framework can actually help reduce that level of exponential growth and hopefully also give a longevity to our systems without having to start searching around for newer systems because the old systems are taking up too much of the maintenance cost. So we have got Manoj also with us today, and Manoj had initially published Knowledge-Driven Development as a book in June 2018 that was focused more onto development and maintenance side of activities. Only last week, so less than 10 days back, The new book, which is Introduction to Business Domains, based now the entire presentation is based onto the concepts from that book. That has been published 10 days back. It's available, I believe, on Amazon. And we have Manoj also with us. I just want to take a little bit of a time. Most of the work on this from a concept perspective has been done by Manoj. Anupam has helped me putting together some of the slides for this presentation. I'm really thankful to both of them. And both are with us now on the session. So I will open up for any questions which are there.
Thank you so much, sir, for such a wonderful session. It gave us much needed knowledge for us to embark on the knowledge-driven development process. Now I open the forum to the participants. Let me see the questions which we have got. So we have got one question, sir. What is a common misconception or myth that people have around knowledge management that our approach bus?
Manoj, do
In
you
other
want
words,
to handle that?
Yes, sir. Yeah, I can start and then you can summarize it. In my personal experience, knowledge management is something that not everybody believes in. But this is interesting because everybody has got some piece of knowledge in his head, right? So it's not that without having this elaborate inventory of knowledge, they cannot do anything. So they start doing it, and on the way they learn knowledge, and once they learn something, the need for them to think that, okay, what about others also? Will they have to undergo the same process, or should we make them? They don't bother most of the time because there's no budget to do all those type of things. So in general, knowledge management is looking very good in concept, but in practice, it is difficult. But at the same time, every coin has got two sides. So if there are people who are on the other side of the world and they have made knowledge management working pretty beautifully, and they have achieved almost impossible tasks with the wise usage of knowledge management.
I think I'll add on from a very first-hand perspective onto the knowledge management side. But knowledge management has got one challenge, which is how do you collect the knowledge? That is dependent on the business users, that is dependent on the operational users, that's dependent on pretty much everyone in the organization. So people look at, why should I keep adding to that knowledge? Why should I take the time to contribute here? Because it's going to delay my work. The advantage which comes in, and the advantage starts showing up in a matter of weeks and months, is it starts saving me time more than it had costed me to add to that knowledge. So it takes, there's always a lag in terms of knowledge management with some basic level of knowledge. However, the advantage starts coming in a matter of weeks and months, and it's well worth it. And I've seen that firsthand. The second item which is there, which is on a question, is what are the different challenges we can assume with KDD? This session today we have devoted only to a business analysis perspective. However, KDD extends onto the development and maintenance side of activities. I will talk only from a KDD perspective on the business analysis side of activities, where it pretty much pervades each and every set of activities which we do. Whether we are looking at from understanding a new domain to actually doing requirements management, depicting those requirements, towards also started looking at from a test perspective, testing scenario perspective. So it actually starts looking at from those angles. We will going into more specific areas also. However, you can reach out definitely to Manoj on his LinkedIn perspective, and that would be useful. The next question from Ganesh is, in the mesh, we talk about process and product. Does the procedures form part of the rules? If not, then when does the procedure fit into the mesh? The procedure actually, if you look at from a perspective onto the mesh, the procedure actually has two aspects always. One is what is the step of activities or what should I say, succession of activities. That is the process part. The moment we come to a decision point, that is my business rule point. So this is where the procedure, and I'm decomposing the procedure. Hopefully I'm answering the question in the right perspective where it was asked. I'm decomposing the procedure onto a process versus a business rule perspective. And that is where we can start drawing that differentiation in our mind. Ganesh, for your question in terms of how can you adopt towards KDD driven environment, I think the best would be if offline you could connect with Manoj, and he's the best person to guide on to that. I'm reading the next question. Could you please help us on the effective ways and means to enhancing the industry specific knowledge in a short duration of time and apply the learning to upcoming projects? I'm coming from my direct background perspective, which is having worked across multiple domains. One of the most effective ways I found, if that is a business domain where I have been a user, I've been a user moving to a supermarket. My background has been primarily banking and capital markets. But since then, I have branched out onto so many different domains, and I'm talking from that perspective. Do I keep myself from a user perspective, from a consumer perspective, onto a supermarket? So what do I see in a supermarket? How are the shelves loaded? Then what happens when a product is out of stock? How does the checkout work? That's me as a consumer focusing on to what I have experienced. Using those, I can start going one step deeper into the business side of activities. What goes on behind those walls? What happens when a product is out of stock on the shelf? Typically, I would turn around and ask, do you have more of this available in your godown or in your store? Can you bring it out? Well, the answer is typically, yes, sir, we have. Let me go get some more. Or no, sir, sorry, we are out of stock. So somewhere it's an out of stock situation. That means the order has not been placed or the order has been placed, but there's a delay in receiving it. Now that is where the inventory management side starts coming into play. So I'm moving into the retail environment focus without having a knowledge of what a retail environment is. That's how I picked up the knowledge. First, putting myself as a consumer into that perspective. If I can find myself as a consumer as an anchor point, that is a critical item to use and identify some anchor point for myself. Then I can start looking at talking to a few other people, but because I already know what is as a consumer side, I can understand what the other people from that industry are saying far more quickly. That is also where the second item comes in. How do I start phrasing my questions? Do I start phrasing my questions as an open-ended question or very specific to the point question? The moment I'm doing to the point question, my business user has a very low chance of finding out that my level of knowledge on that particular domain is next to zero. Believe me, in my lifetime, I have used this to start moving from banking till the time I became an expert onto fund management also. And my entire knowledge on fund management came from my business users who never realized that my level of knowledge at the beginning was near zero. So that is also some of the effective ways. And we can take it up, Manjunath, in far more detail, but I'm just giving you the high level response onto that. Vijay's question, how does KDD manage to help recipient or target body to know the insights and get the concurrence for better project management? Manoj, do you want to address this because it will move in from the business domain side onto a project and project management side of activities also?
Right, absolutely, sir. So knowledge has got two portions. One is generic knowledge and other is implementable piece of knowledge. So we, in the knowledge management side, we churn out from the generic knowledge to something which is implementable knowledge. And when we say implementable knowledge, it is test cases and this the outputs of application design, which is your different classes, different methods, different objects, and all in the inventory and relationship format. So this brings us extreme quantification in the implementation side of the world of software development. So what happens is now everything is very clear. Project manager doesn't even need to go to test team and say what is the progress, because from the inventory relationship model that Sir had shown earlier, he can himself derive that 30 test cases are written and 20 requirements are there. So 30 test cases matches up with 10 requirements. So 10 test requirements are not still covered by any of the test cases. So vaguely he will assume that the progress is 50%. So these type of quantifications actually help project manager not to depend on the feelings, and then many times the teams have got many reasons not to tell the real status. So it brings a beautiful transparency in the entire project where everyone has got the same level of understanding, and not that 80% of the testing is done only to be discovered in the last stage that it was not even 20%. So that is how a project management gets benefited from this concept.
I have the next question from Woodley. How do you see adoption of KDD in organizations using agile methodology? How can an organization adopt these practices at an enterprise level? I am just going to say one thing before I hand over to Manoj, is actually two things. One, this is an environment and this is a knowledge approach which is perfectly suited for agile because it's so much easier to keep updated. But the second thing, which is the second part of your question, it has to go through a change management perspective. Applying it at an organization level requires too many people, and I'm talking from a resistance perspective, too many people to be convinced. So start small, establish it at a product level, establish it at a product plus process level before you start moving on to covering the entire product and later only onto the entire organization. Manoj, over to you if you want to add further onto the agile perspective.
Yes, absolutely, sir. So few things here. This leveling and going incrementally into the details of knowledge, from domain knowledge to enterprise knowledge to project knowledge, gives KDD a very ready-made approach of implementing it in the organization. If it is a typical IT company, we can think of domain knowledge being in the purview of business groups like BFSI, retail, manufacturing, and then different accounts. We go a little bit deeper into the domain knowledge itself. Enterprise knowledge. Different accounts will have will detail it out from domain knowledge to enterprise knowledge, and different projects of those accounts will drill down from enterprise knowledge to project knowledge. So this is a scientific and quite structured approach in which organization can implement KDD. Coming on to Agile, I remember a few years ago when I was talking to a very senior business analyst, he was saying the only problem with Agile is exhaustiveness of information and traceability is missing. These two things are supplemented or can be supplemented by KDD. And the reason we have more confidence on this supplement working than before is we are not talking about documents, which is very vague to extract the digital knowledge and work out there with find out what is needed, when is needed, and who needs what. because it is in the inventory and relationship format. The maintainability of this knowledge is much, much better than FSD documents and BRD documents and usual sets of documents that we are used to working in the environment of waterfall. So agility is very well supported in KDD. In fact, KDD enriches Agile with its digital knowledge management proposition, which is a real concern as of today, that Agile, we know people will go and work it out, make a software, but then when they are left, how do we maintain it? Because the knowledge is gone.
Thank you, Manoj. Next question from Subhash Chandra. I'm reading only part of the question. Being a BA, how can we manage effectively to maintain KDD? How can we get the management influence for the team members or the project and program members to transfer the knowledge for future projects? One area which I would like to again now elaborate, which is what I said, it has to go through a change management perspective. Because there is always a resistance to change, and that's a human nature. So the moment I start looking at that, can I find my first instance where I can create the basic mesh and publish it on the wiki over time as I get time or as new projects come in? Let me start doing a hyperlink to those documents, but also modifying my mesh slightly. Now, modifying the mesh and creating those hyperlinks on an ongoing basis will not be more than half an hour to 1 hour a week is my estimate. So that is the time which goes into actually making sure the knowledge is reusable next time. Over time, the moment I can get 2 other BAs to start working with me onto these things, and the next project, the turnaround onto the impact analysis is shorter with documented evidences, you start winning over the project managers and the tech leads onto your side, because you have made their task also a little easier onto the impact management side of activities. Manoj, anything you would like to add?
Yes, sir, absolutely. So this whole area of the implementation side, we are still a little bit dark because we have not gone there. But the idea in an ideal state scenario, we wouldn't require any document in the project delivery environment. We are we have to replace everything that we used to create in the typical traditional methodology with the inventory and relationship formula. So if you need a list of test cases, here is it that some SQL is going to give you from our single piece of repository, single source of repository for knowledge. Even in the implementation side, associating risk with inventory and relationship, and most of the risk can be associated with your inventory and relationship, and many other aspects of implementation are directly or indirectly driven from this project knowledge. So digitized project knowledge has the potential to replace FSD, BRD, and all such documents to an extent that it's not that it is an overhead on top of your usual SDLC activities. It is going to relieve you from the pain of producing a document. And the beauty is you can directly upload it back into your enterprise without too much of a problem. So after 5 years, let's say if your typical agile project takes you 200% days of effort, agile plus KDD, if you implement that after 5 years, it may give you 50% of effort saving, because you're reusing 80% of the enterprise knowledge that you already had, which is not possible without some structured knowledge. One of the example is KDD.
Thank you, Manoj. Thanks a lot. question from Manjuna. How do we need to capitalize without impacting the project cost and scope? And I'm reading the next question also. How an enterprise can get a tangible ROI on this KDD framework? Manoj, would you want to take up both these questions together? Because both are focused around the pricing side of activities or the cost side of activities and the effort side.
Yes, sir, absolutely. So the first question we have answered partially already, that it removes us from the burden of producing different artifacts of project delivery. So that gives us a little bit savings that can be applied to create this KDD structure into the project delivery area. And again, as sir had said, it is a mindset problem also. When most of the people will not believe that it is actually possible. But my own experimentation on it has proven that it is possible. We only need some sort of right mindset people to create many and many case studies, many and many pilots to actually prove that this is not just an idea, it is practical and possible also. So that is on the first questions of it. The second question, how an enterprise can get tangible ROI on KDD framework. Well, that's the whole concept of KDD framework. It is digitizing the knowledge, and the digital knowledge is driving the project delivery. Project delivery today is being driven not to the extent that the digital project knowledge can drive. And that brings in quantification in each and everything that we can think of from the entire end-to-end project delivery. So ROI, all the traditional methodologies, when we compare it to KDD, I think that the quantification, due to quantification of project knowledge, KDD would score higher than the existing methodologies.
So I'll add on further onto the ROI side. Anupam, the critical perspective onto calculating a ROI also depends on the current stage within the organization, because that's the starting point. Once that is done, what are the current processes in place, how the information is being captured and stored, whether there is a established knowledge management approach or even a rudimentary knowledge management approach towards then into implementing KDD. Because remember, each of these knowledge artifacts will have to be ported over to KDD perspective. So there is an initial cost of porting over that will automatically define the return on investment, that will impact the return on investment. And then on an ongoing basis, the ongoing basis business case is fairly well established. The initial implementation case depends on to the starting point within the organization. So hope I have answered that perspective. The ROI, you always keep those two components of ROI in mind, the initial implementation and the ongoing management. Thank you very much.